Okay, awesome. So I just want to say thank you for joining us today, folks. We are going to talk to you today a little bit about UDL, some ADHD and neurodiversity, and then the making the visual verbal, as well as some accommodations and what we do in student accessibility services. And so we have a couple speakers with us today, and we're going to try our best to stay within our time frame so that we have time for questions at the end. And so to start, I believe, is Mark. If he is ready, he will take it away.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And as you hopefully just heard, I am Mark Lubrick. Oh, let's wait for it. It's taking it. There we go. Yes, I'm Mark Lubrick from the Office of Open Learning, and today I get to talk to you about UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, and I'm also going to hopefully share some resources with you that might help with ensuring the things you're doing with students are accessible. Let's get to it. First, what is UDL, or Universal Design for Learning? It's built on the idea that we want our learning to be designed to be fairly universal, open to everybody, actually meeting the needs of all of our students. And part of that is overcoming the myth of the average student. The idea that there's this typical average student we're aiming for. Because when you think about students or yourselves, I mean, anybody is a diverse and multifaceted person. You might be great at English literature and maybe not so great at music composition, or you might be great at with cognitive functioning, but maybe you struggle with your reading comprehension. There's multifacets to what makes a person. And if all we're doing is taking everybody and averaging them out, we're going to get this weird average person that really doesn't match anybody. And if that's what we're aiming for, we're not going to make learning that's good for, well, really anyone. So we want to try to account for all the fringe cases, all of the needs of all of our students, the diverse needs that they have. And part of that is, of course, meeting the AODA requirements. This is what we legally have to do. We don't want to be sued. We have things we legally have to do, but it's going beyond that. It's trying to make sure we meet the needs of our diverse population. It's trying to be inclusive in our examples, in our language, and making sure we meet the equity needs. Not just, oh, I have to be accessible because this person has this thing that they gave me. No, it's trying to plan to be equitable for all, even the people who might not come forward asking for certain things that they need, trying to guess or build that from the start. And a lot of this does come from the original design of universal design for buildings and trying to realize that, oh, some of the things we were doing for buildings and for documents, anything like that, wasn't necessarily accessible. If we look at this image on the left, this is not an accessible building. There's a lot of people who will never be able to get in that building. And a lot of people just won't even try. We want to make sure everyone can get in. And part of the problem is we might then try to take something that's inaccessible and throw accessible components on top of it. And that's what this middle image is really about. These are not accessible steps. I mean, they also look like they're cracking, but beside that, these are not accessible. And eventually someone realized, oh, you know what we could do is in this middle section, I can build a bike ramp. That's what this is, a bike ramp, so people can get bikes up and down easier. And then someone realized, well, if I've already got that ramp, if I slap another ramp on that, oh, maybe people in wheelchairs can get up and down, and we can say this is accessible. But if you look at this, look at that ramp versus this one. This one has ridges and friction built in to try to keep people from sliding. This one doesn't. They're also not the same size. Anyone who actually tries to use this is probably going to have this part move much quicker than that. They're going to wipe out. They're going to go slamming into this post, this fence. This is not accessible. Yes, it looks very dangerous. I'm guessing probably someone will get sued at some point. And it's the idea that trying to take something that's inaccessible and slap accessibility things on it doesn't really work. A lot of times it doesn't work at all. And even if it does, it's more difficult, it's more expensive, it's more time consuming. We're going back and fixing mistakes we made. Whereas what we want to do is plan from the beginning, make things accessible from the beginning. And this over here, this right hand image is a good example. Don't have the entrance way up there, put it on the ground floor. put scanners to make sure the door is open. Of course, you got to make sure the scanners actually recognize everybody as well. But if we're designing from the beginning to be accessible, it'll make our life easier. And now one thing I did forget to mention, by the way, is that if you have any questions, comments, anything, feel free to put it in a chat. As mentioned, at the end, we will have a more formal Q&A period, but I'd love to try to deal with or answer any questions, concerns you might have as we go. I will be monitoring the chat. Okay, so idea of UDL can be intimidating. Where will you get started? Well, thankfully, I have a great resource I can point to you to, and I'm going to drop the links to it in the chat. This was a resource that was funded by the eCampus Ontario, and they gave funding to 10 institutions to work together to design this UDL guide. It's a free, open resource. You can take this resource, use it to learn, you can modify it, you can use it for things in your class, take some of the images, and there's a lot of great information in there. There's an English version and a French version. We are still adding French captions to some of the videos, so hopefully you'll forgive us for that, but hopefully that'll be done shortly as well. But if you look, the guide has a lot of information, especially Module 1. I would encourage all of you to check it out. There's some sections that talk about, well, how can I apply these UDL principles if I'm teaching in class or online or in a hybrid setting? They have some recommendations, some practices you might want to consider. There's things about how to make sure I'm being equitable and in meeting the diverse needs of my students. How can I incorporate Indigenous pedagogies? A lot of really important, good information that you probably want to check out. I'm also a huge fan of checklists. Make life a little easier for people. Hopefully, I will drop this document in the chat as well. It's a OneDrive folder that you can hopefully all access. It has two different things in it. One is the 10 tips for creating accessible documents or content. It'll tell you things like how to have alt text. You might want to just read through it. And again, think of that when you first start off designing your content. If you're building a document for students, building slides for students, it'll help make sure it's going to be accessible. There's also a checklist in there. So maybe you have something that was already designed, you might go through and see, oh, does it have these things that I need for it to be accessible? There's also a variety of tools that I wanted to mention that might help, again, as you're developing resources, as you're teaching students, as you're working with them, things you can do to make life more accessible. And one that I always love to point out is the Microsoft Office suite of tools. We all get Office 365 for free. We can download it, and it actually has built-in accessibility checkers. Word, PowerPoint, Excel all have those built in. And I'll wait for this loop back. What you do is you go up to File, and we're going to check for issues, specifically checking accessibility. And what this would do is let you know if there's certain accessibility features is identified, problems. It's not perfect. This doesn't excuse us from doing the work. It doesn't mean we can ignore that checklist, but it does help us. It'll identify things like, oh, you're missing alt text. Or maybe in a Word document, oh, you're skipping a bunch of headings levels. Not only will it say there's an issue, it'll identify where that issue is, it'll tell you why this is important, and it'll have advice for how to fix it. So a lot of you are probably using these documents already. Maybe you're taking Word, exporting it out. Maybe you're making an Excel table for students. Use the inbuilt features to help improve your accessibility, or at least check it. Another tool that I wanted to mention is one I like, Wave, because some of you might be going beyond just PowerPoint, beyond just Excel, and maybe you're helping with websites. Maybe you're helping with the Blackboard site, maybe a Drupal site, maybe a WordPress site. Well, this can be added to Chrome, to Firefox, and then you can actually check the accessibility of the site. There might be things you can't fix. Some Blackboard pages I know have contrast issues that hopefully they will fix one day, but it will let you check the things you're creating and make sure it's meeting the needs, the requirements that the AODA has. A couple other things, especially around color. Especially, I will drop these links in the chat as well. Sorry for spamming so many links, but I figure you can look at these later as you need. They will show up in the recording, by the way, which is nice. But color is very important. And I really like the second one because what you can do is you can upload an image and then look at all the colors in the image, set one is foreground, one is background, or you can take the color codes if you identify them, say from PowerPoint or Word. You can go in and say, well, would this be accessible? Because unfortunately, a lot of times when people are making posters or images, there's not enough contrast. Especially here, Windsor. A lot of us love using the Windsor colors. And then someone puts yellow writing on a white background and nobody can read it. Nobody. You need to check to make sure there's enough contrast for all people to be able to read this. This is a great resource for that. A couple other free tools that you might not be used to or familiar with, or realize that we have free access here at the University of Windsor to, Equatio. This one I love. It's about making math digitally accessible. And I will drop a link to that in a little bit, but the problem with math a lot of times is you have an image of an equation, and a screen reader won't be able to read that. So instead, we need to make sure we have alt text. And another principle, by the way, of universal design for learning is what is required for some people is good for all. Having alt text for an image, well, someone who needs a screen reader, that's how they're going to understand the image. But for someone who maybe has a weaker internet connection, if that image doesn't load, the alt text will still tell them what that image is about. So it's good for all. Equatio will help with that in math. I can have a variety of tools. I can enter math in a variety of ways, LaTeX, math. Yes, required for some, great for all. And you can write the math out, you can speak it, you can even take images. This kind of tool can be great for enhancing the learning of you and your students. Maybe you're in a lab environment where you've written out a bunch of math examples and then you want to make a copy for everybody. You could actually use your phone, take an image of the math, and import it to your computer as digital editable math. It interacts with Blackboard. If I want to, I can use this scan here to go to a website, any website, or maybe a PDF of my textbook. Scan the image of an equation and import it. Maybe you're sitting in the room with your instructor who's written a bunch of things on the board. You or the students could use this to get that math, import it, make it accessible, and not have to retype it all out. Even silly things like these, I mean, maybe not silly, I like this, I think it's kind of cool. The interactive graph, if you're teaching transformations, this kind of thing could be really cool for showing that. Another program is Read and Write. And I will now drop the link in the chat to the page about Read and Write and Equatio. It has help pages, it has help videos and links out to how to install it and things like workshops that I do with these tools as well. It has a built-in screen reader. Some people might not be able to afford things like JAWS. This is a free screen reader for everyone. Maybe one of your jobs or part of your job might be an instructor giving you a printed document and they want you to make a digital copy of it. Or maybe they give you a PDF, which is really just an image of an old book. That's not accessible. You don't want to have to retype all that. Read and Write would let you scan, either scan a physical document or a digital document and make it accessible. It'll create an OCR image, something that can actually have the text in it and be read. Saves you time. There's speech to text. Maybe I don't want to have to type out things in Word. This will do it for me. There's translator features. Great for our second language learners, things that maybe they aren't familiar with, they can translate to their native tongue, take a look and learn a little bit better. Even things like being able to highlight a term. You can highlight the term, you can highlight notes and make notes out of it, but if you highlight something, you can then actually get a definition of it. You can get the actual written definitions there, even if you want, give you images to try and help your appreciation and understanding of that term. Of course, we also want to make sure if we're making videos, they are accessible. If we're making videos, we need captions for them. Well, on campus, we have UJA, which is a great program for that. It lets me capture multiple streams, lets students pick the stream they're watching. It'll try to caption that video for me. I can edit those captions. It'll host the video. I can edit the video in it. If you're interested in that, you will likely want to help check out the UJA page. And I will drop the link in the chat in a second. Of course, some of you might prefer to use something like Stream or even YouTube if you want to make it more public. I've got a couple videos that show how to use those services to create captions and edit those captions as well. The Yuja page has a bunch of help videos as well if you want to use Yuja. And finally, ideally, we want to make sure our presentations are accessible. Teams is great for that. Teams, you can turn on captions at the individual level. A student needs captions, they can turn them on. Unfortunately, the virtual classroom does not have that. You can use things like Google Slides. You can use things like PowerPoint. They have captioning turned on. That's what I've been using this whole time. It's not perfect. I always get a kick anytime I say Lubric. What is it? Oh, yeah, that's about what I expect. Doesn't get everything right, but it does a pretty decent job. And again, it's helping me reach all my learners. So at this point, I'm going to pass it on to the next person.
Thanks, Mark, for those really great resources. As someone who works in student accessibility services, I also took some notes so that when profs ask me, I can be like, actually, we do have that. Anyways, we are going to move on to Nadia and Rain, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about their ADHD and neurodiversity project. So I will swing it over to you folks.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I need to figure out how to share this presentation. My apologies. Do you see what I'm trying to show you?
Yeah, so Rami, when you pull up the PowerPoint now, like how I see it, if you put it in presenter mode, we can follow along with you.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Let me do that then.
Yep.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'm just going to pull up my script on a separate page, sorry. So we are from the ADHD project. My name is Rami, and I'm joined by Nadia. We're going to be doing a really quick introduction slash presentation to our usual presentation. So just give you a sneak peek. So who we are the ADHD project. We are a student-led initiative that promotes inclusion and respect for students who have been diagnosed with ADHD or identify as neurodiverse. The project was created to destigmatize ADHD and neurodiversity on campus, provide students with resources and support, promote welcoming environments at the university, and it was produced by the University of Windsor and the Learning Disabilities Association of Windsor Essex with support from the Government of Ontario. So attention deficit hyperactive disorder is often defined as a neurodevelopment disorder. Some common symptoms include, but are not limited to, hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and impulsivity. And then many people with ADHD excel at creative problem solving, and they are exceptionally empathetic and often have a strong sense of fairness. There are 3 ways that ADHD can present. Inattentive type, which was formerly referred to as ADD, but we've since moved away from that terminology. Hyperactive type, and combined, which, as you could probably put together, a combination of both. Some common symptoms, again, not limited to these, are, so for inattentive, we have daydreaming, hyperfocusing, easily distracted by small stimuli, struggling to pay attention, struggling with organization and time management, excels at creative problem solving, and emotionally sensitive and struggles with rejection. And then on the other side, for hyperactive, we see fidgeting, constant movement, impatience, struggling to control their volume, very creative, lots of physical and mental energy, experiences intense crashes after exerting energy, and may interrupt others. I'm gonna let Nadia take over from here.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadia, as Rami said, and I am the other student coordinator for the ADHD project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the barriers, accessibility barriers that people with ADHD may experience. So as with many people with disabilities, people with ADHD may experience an increase of barriers in their day-to-day life. Some examples of these barriers: they may experience discrimination due to stereotypes about people with ADHD, that they are lazy, unruly, or incompetent, which is not true. They may experience, a difficulty with receiving accommodations because of their so-called invisible disability. And they may experience difficulty attaining a diagnosis due to social, financial, racial, or other gender-based factors. So accessibility is a word that gets used a lot these days, but what does it actually mean, and how do we use accessible practices in our day-to-day lives? Creating accessible spaces for people with ADHD can be really challenging because ADHD is what we commonly refer to as an invisible disability. This means that when you first meet someone, you may not be able to tell that they have ADHD. Because of that, people with ADHD have a difficult time working, learning, and socializing in places that are not designed for people with ADHD. Some of you may know, some of you may not. I am a person with ADHD. I was diagnosed a few years ago. And so I'm often told that I'm a good example of, ADHD being considered an invisible disability. Because when you first meet me, you might not know that I have ADHD. I see a question in the chat. We'll maybe finish up with the presentation and then I'll jump back to the question. So here are a couple just easy, quick tips of how to create more accessible and respectful places for all people. So when possible, provide meeting notes, lecture notes, or other content ahead of time. That will help people to plan, it'll help people feel a little bit more organized, and it'll allow everyone the opportunity to refer to the content before they're expected to do something with it. Whenever possible, encourage alternative working or learning styles. This can be something as simple as being able to stand, being able to walk around, listening to music, having a snack. There's lots of different things that in traditional, education settings we frown on that we really don't need to, because they're not bad, they're just different. And so alternative working and learning styles can be a really great way to support students with ADHD. Always use inclusive and respectful language. As we mentioned, ADHD is considered an invisible disability, and so you don't know who you're talking to, and so it's always best to refer to everyone with inclusive and respectful language. And finally, when in doubt, just ask. Always refer to the person with ADHD when you're implementing accommodations or supports. They will know what is best for them. So if you're interested in learning more about ADHD, we recommend checking out the Centre for ADHD Awareness Canada and the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance. They both have some wonderful resources that can help you further your understanding of ADHD and neurodiversity. If you're interested in learning more about the project specifically, please visit our website, which will be posted on the last slide, or feel free to send us an email at adhdeproject@uwindsor.ca. Thank you so much, everybody, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Nadia, are you comfortable answering the question in the chat, or is that something that you would like me to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to go to the chat and see this here. Okay, perfect. So I'll just read out the question really quickly. So the question is, for someone who suspects they might have ADHD, how might they go about seeking a diagnosis? So that's an excellent question. It's also a very complicated question. So I'm going to give a really short and sweet answer. And then if you're interested in more information, please feel free to reach out to us after this presentation. So if you think that you might have ADHD and you're interested in considering, pursuing a diagnosis, the best thing that you can do is to go see a healthcare medical professional, somebody that you go see for all of your other medical needs. They'll be able to get you on the right path. If you run into some difficulties with that, there's also great resources through the university that you can access that might not be able to give you a diagnosis, but can maybe give you some more information about some resources that you could use to, ease your time during your schooling. I also really recommend, don't self-diagnose online, because there can be dangers with that. But go use Google, use any information available to you, and see what other people are experiencing, see which symptoms match up, and that can give you a really good idea of what your next steps might be. Hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and to follow up with that, another great resource is to come see someone in Student Accessibility Services, as we also have some resources and referral powers to help you out with those things. But I'll talk about that after Veronica. I muted myself. You're up next, Veronica. I'm going to try to share your slides.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Jocelyn.
Share screen. Share screen. Share.
That's it.
Slideshow.
There we go.
There's some lag here. Okay, from the beginning.
That's great. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Jocelyn's going to be my advancing the slides because I'm not very good at that. And usually when Jocelyn's not doing it, Liz does it. But anyway, good afternoon. My name is Veronica Maggiorodi. I'm sitting at a desk here in my living room speaking to you. I'm a woman with a light complexion and short white hair. I'm one of the Teaching and Learning Senior Fellows at the university's Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you today about universal design, but within the context of the visuals. Now, I'd just like to give a little recap. Mark did an amazing job of talking about the myths that we have in the university about the average or the typical learner in our classes. Obviously, as he indicated, variability is the rule and not the exception, okay? Students have demands and they can be associated with sensory and physical abilities, emotional and behavioral challenges, learning differences, as Rami and Nadia have indicated. And also, we have to think about the language barriers that many of our students have as they come to the university. So difference is normative, not sameness. So we really have to demystify that. And it's our role as being a GA or a TA or assisting with the teaching process that we understand the multiple ways in which students learn, okay? Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about today mostly is about the idea of the different forms of communication and how we use them. But going back onto what Mark said about universal design, I'm trained as an architect. I teach in the architecture program at the university. And it's very interesting because universal design initially was when we talked about it, was from a physical point of view. And as Mark did in this wonderful slide with the stairs, fixing things after the fact is very time consuming, is not very efficient, and it doesn't work very well. So the important thing to do is to do it right the first time. And so when you're planning for classes or you're assisting with instructors, it's really important that you think about it up front. Don't do it after and say, oh, I need to do it now. No, do it when you're thinking about it. Okay, so these are a few things here in this particular slide that I've listed with regards to about the multiple and the varied and the flexible options. And the first thing you should do is think about the presentations of information that you have for your students. This can be done in a multitude of ways. We're really used to doing things in text, but obviously we can also get information and help our students using audio, using video, still photographs and images, and a variety of assistive technologies which Mark referenced. The second thing is the idea of expression by and assessment of students. We need to consider offering more flexibility in the way that students are evaluated. Sure, writing an essay or taking an exam are things that we've done traditionally, but there are other ways to evaluate students. They can talk and express themselves. Why can't they draw? They can do things, they can perform, they can make audio recordings and video recordings. So use your imagination and think about all the variety, because we have a variety of students and they want to express themselves in different ways. The image, there's an image on this particular slide on the right-hand side. It says, I ate a rainbow for breakfast. I had a class that I taught where I asked the students to do their final project in whatever way they wished. This was an English student, and she did her final project in poetry. It was absolutely delightful. It expressed her method of learning, and it again was an expression that was very fulfilling for her. And the third thing is engagement of students. We're quite used to engaging students on an individual basis, but we also have to recognize that group activities are really important, and that they can challenge things, and that inclusiveness can be supported by a variety of different methods. Okay, Jocelyn, can we go to the next one?
Maybe. There we go.
Okay. Now, most of us use visual aids in our presentations, and the PowerPoint is really the most widely used that we have in the Academy. So in our visual presentations, we really have to acknowledge learner variability and integrate design strategies that are accessible to the students when they look at that. And here I've just listed a few of the categories that you should think about when you're doing a PowerPoint. For example, the design considerations. Make it simple. Having a complicated slide doesn't help anyone at all. Lay things out so that they're consistent, so that as you move from one slide to the next slide, students can actually understand what you're doing. In other words, not every slide is different. Have slide information. In other words, putting a title at the top or a subtitle at the top. So instead of saying slide number 3 or slide number 5, you actually have a title. This helps students identify things, and again, gives them more control in their discussions with them, and ease of negotiating. Obviously, we've all heard about font size. The headings generally should always be at least 36 point. But all the other ones, people have a tendency to go down as far as 14 point, way too small, okay? So keep your text at least 24 point. And the other thing is bullets. Bullets are really helpful. They're organizational. They help people to concentrate in a certain area. So consider them as well. Okay, Jocelyn, can we have the next one? And the other one, in terms of other kinds of things to consider, font options. Sans serif works best. There's a variety that I've listed here, but usually the sans serif is the best one. Try to use bold when you can rather than italics. Most people find italics uncomfortable. Even underlining is uncomfortable, and uppercase oftentimes doesn't work because it's difficult to negotiate the uppercase letter. And again, as Mark talked about, think about high contrast colors, and there's lots of information about that. Now, the thing that I want to talk about today is mostly visuals as an alternative. In other words, images are a really great way of presenting information because they can describe things that text doesn't necessarily. Okay, Jocelyn. Okay, there's an accessibility conference that's held every year at the University of Guelph, and I would highly recommend. It's in the springtime. If you get a chance, sometimes it's online. The past 2 years it's been online. Sometimes you go, but I had the pleasure of going to it several years where Joel Snyder gave a presentation. And the reason I raised Joel here is he's a pioneer of what we call audio description. He facilitates description actually in the theater and on television and in film. And he's written several books, and he talks about how to describe visuals. And it's very good. And if you have an opportunity, make sure that you go to some of his websites, because they work out really, really great. We're not going to be involved in films, obviously, most of us, but most of us are involved with images and charts in our PowerPoint material. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. Okay, Jocelyn? Okay, so it's really important to consider what to describe when you have a slide, okay? Take a close look at the images and then ask yourself the following questions. And I'm going to go through each of these questions one by one here. Okay, so let's use the image on the right-hand side of this slide when we examine these questions. So the first one is, what does the image convey? Well, the problem with this image on the right side is it's not a single image, right? There are 6 images and a question in the middle. So do all of these images convey exactly the same thing? Do all of these people have accessibility concerns? So it might be good for some people that can recognize the connection between these images, but for some, this is going to be problematic, and you might have to do an interpretation of that immediately. So think about how the images are conveyed. The second question is, what is most essential? Now, in looking at this image, we might say that the relationship between all those images, but not everyone's going to see this at the same time. So you're going to have to think about, did I need to have all of these things to convey the same concept, okay? The third one is, what is happening? Well, you've got, in this particular image, you've got 4 images that are related to mobility. There's a person at the foot of the stairs using a crutch. There's a person walking on the street or the sidewalk using a cane. There are multiple people pushing, either families or parents and women that are pushing strollers. And then there's a woman in a wheelchair at the bottom. So there's a lot going on here. And there are 2 images that are specific to individuals who are blind or have low vision. And there's one image where there's a whole bunch of people standing together. So again, you don't know what's happening, and it's very, very busy. The last one is, who is and are in the image? Well, an example here, there's a diverse group of people with varying characteristics. So you can see that describing this is really difficult. So the rule of thumb here is, describe what you see, but if what you see is so busy, as in this particular slide, consider what you need to eliminate. Maybe 1 image or 2 images will do exactly the same thing. Okay, thanks, Jocelyn. If we go to the next one, yeah. Okay, so providing a description of an image should be thoughtful, but I want you to realize it is time consuming, because you have to think about what you're going to do in terms of describing this image. So how do you describe what is being presented? And I'm going to use this image here in order to do this. So in the first one, be descriptive. Use words that convey clear and vivid meaning. Let me give you an example on the slide. This is a long, straight stairway. And this is what we're going to talk about here. I don't have to describe anything else. I'm going to talk about the stairway. So I can be descriptive in my classification of this. The other one is, be objective. Stick to the facts. Avoid any kind of analytical interpretation or emotional response. For example, in this slide, I could say the woman is struggling, or I could say the woman is totally exhausted. But I'm speculating here. I don't know that. There's nothing here to indicate this. I could comment on her body shifting, but to indicate that she's struggling or exhausted is speculative. So that's not being very objective. So don't put things in the image that are not there, okay? Be logical. Use a sequence or structure. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when you're describing an image, go to your left, to your right, go from the bottom to the top, or the top to the bottom, go counterclockwise, but tell the people that are listening to you talk about the image that there's a logical component. Now on this slide, it would make sense because we're looking at the woman from below at the bottom, that when I describe this, I go from the bottom to the top. That would be a logical way to do that. You want to be accurate. Make sure the information that you give is true, correct, and faithful to the narrative. For example, this is in a subway station. But I could say it's busy and the stairway is crowded, but that's not true. You don't see that. Nobody knows that. I don't know that. So again, I'm making an assumption and interpretation, and I shouldn't put that into the image. And the last one is be brief. The shorter, the better, and try to avoid redundancies at all possible. Okay. Alrighty, so the other thing is, when you look at any kind of image, what details do you require to mention in the image? So in this particular one, do we need to know, we need to know that this is a lake, but do we need to know what lake it is? This is Emerald Lake in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Is that central? It's located in Alberta. Is it important that people know that? Is there something they gain for it? What do you need to highlight? Do we need to highlight that there are two mountains in the background and it's part of a mountain range? Do we have to talk about the fact that there's only one canoe on the lake, or that there are two people in the canoe? The other thing is, should we talk about the fact that it's daytime versus nighttime? So what season is it? What kind of weather is it? Okay, those are all things that when you look at the image, you need to think about including. The other thing is, what's so relevant here? The fact that the canoeists are wearing life jackets and a hat, we don't need to know that. Do we need to know the color of the water? No. Do we need to know that the trees are reflecting in the water? No. So there are lots of things that you're not going to include because it has no benefit to the person understanding it. Okay, Jocelyn. The other thing is, what detail is required to mention in the image? And so the first one is the subject. Now in this subject, we all recognize this. These are two images that have the skyline, and it's of a metropolitan city, but we can recognize this metropolitan city, right? We can identify that it is a location which is in Detroit, and it's in the United States. So the location is an important component. The direction and the orientation might be important. In other words, we're looking north, but we're looking from Canada. We're looking from Windsor. So there are cardinal points and locations that are important here. The foreground and the background position oftentimes is important. In other words, the fact that we have the Ambassador Bridge gives us something to know that we're again on the west side of the Ambassador Bridge, whereas the bottom gives you an idea that we're in the sculpture garden. And the other thing are features. Do you need to indicate every building in these photographs? No, you don't need to do that. It's a skyline. It's not necessary. So think about the objects and whether you need to include them or not. Okay, Jocelyn. The other thing is you want to be succinct, okay? In this particular one, we're obviously looking at the orbiting paths of the planets in our solar system. But we don't have to go through every one that's here. The other thing that you want to do is more is not better. You just be very simple about what you're doing and only indicate when color is necessary. The color in this particular image only helps you differentiate that we have different planets. It does nothing else at all. So there's no point in talking about it whatsoever. Okay, Jocelyn. The other thing is, when you're summarizing graphs or tables, any kind of illustration, this is going to be really difficult to do, and you have to be very careful about images that you select. So what does this image convey? Well, it's talking about the Canadian 2021 elections. but you gain that from the writing. So you have to read what is here in order for someone who's visually impaired to see that. What is the most essential point? Well, the fact that the Liberals won. That's the most important thing. And what kind of detail do you have? Now, if you notice this, each of the parties' count, in terms of the seat count, is listed here, plus the number of seats that they gained. If you're going to do this, you have to talk again. Remember, we talked about the idea of going from left to right and top to bottom. You have to indicate what you're actually conveying here. So this is not the best example of showing any kind of table whatsoever. And the other thing, there's a lot of irrelevant information. We don't need to know that the Liberals are in red and the Conservatives are in blue, okay? So that might be beneficial in one sense, but not necessarily to the other. Okay, Jocelyn. So in finishing up here, the other thing, and Mark referenced it, always try to think about having your images, even when you're using social media posts, where you use alt text, okay? Jocelyn, you want to go to the next one? So when you're using in PowerPoint, use the alt text and try to put in, every time you have an image, a description of what that image is, because it helps the individuals who, again, are visually impaired to actually listen to what is there. Okay, Jocelyn. So to sort of recap at the end here, accessibility should be part of the design process. It should be part of the process from the very beginning of your work. It should not be an afterthought at the end. And as Mark had said previously, you integrate it into the process of universal design. Now I've included, Jocelyn, if you want, when you circulate this, can you go to, I've included some resource pages, page 1 and page 2, and so I would recommend going to these URLs to look at some of the information. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. All right, I think I'm up. Okay, I was getting a little red no-go sign. So I now am going to, thank you for that, Veronica. I'm sorry, I'm not super great at being a moderator. I'm usually just a presenter. So thank you so much for that. I think it's really important that we remember that, you know, being accessible in the content that we create cannot be an afterthought. It really needs to be at the forefront of what we're doing. So I'm going to talk to us now about student accessibility services. And I'm going to, maybe that will be helpful. Stop sharing my screen so that I can share it again.
Yep, that works, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Okay, so like I said, my name is Jocelyn Laredo. I work in Student Accessibility Services as an accessibility advisor, and I'm also the co-chair of UN Pride Committee, which I'm just going to plug a little bit at the end of this presentation. So what does Student Accessibility Services do? So the university is committed to creating an inclusive and teaching and learning environment that aligns with provincial guidelines for academic accommodations, so AODA, which Mark referred to earlier. And the link here in the slide is accessible in that I shared the slides already with folks. In Student Accessibility Services, we work with students, faculty, and staff to help enhance the student experience for students with disabilities. So we see students with many different types of disabilities Nadia and Rami talked about some of those being the invisible disability. We also see students that have visible disabilities. So the majority of our students do have invisible disabilities, meaning that it is not something that you can see just by looking at them. These students will still provide medical documentation outlining their limitations, and so therefore are accommodated appropriately. So it is the job of the accessibility advisors to go through that documentation, which is submitted by medical professionals, and then looking at the limitation of the student, create their faculty notification letter, which will outline the accommodations that the student needs in order to receive an equitable education. So this is not depicted of our current situation at the University of Windsor. I'm still kind of working through those stats from last year, but essentially the majority of our students have some sort of specific learning disability, and so that makes up the majority of students that we see down here in Dillon Hall, room 117. And then the next most significant is our students who are suffering from some sort of mental health challenge. And then we also see a lot of students with ongoing illness. So whether that's like a medical challenge or, things like that. The thing that's not captured here is that we do see students with temporary disabilities. And I think this is a spot where oftentimes a GA or a TA can play a really important role in letting students know that if you get an email from a student that they've broken their hand and they're unable to do an assignment or write an exam, that you can send them to us here at Student Accessibility Services, and we'd be more than happy to support them with those temporary accommodations to get them through the rest of the school year. So accommodations, an appropriate accommodation enables a student to successfully meet the essential requirements of the program with no alterations in standard or outcomes, although the manner in which the student demonstrates mastery, knowledge, and skill may be altered. And so this has come from the Human Rights Commission guidelines on accessible education. A lot of times too, this is where, principles of universal design will come in, and it might help another student show some mastery, knowledge, and skill. And in turn, it might also help another student. So like getting back to what Mark said, like looking at it that it might help one, but it also is beneficial to all. So an instructor's responsibilities, it's really important that obviously the instructor participates with the accommodation plan, provides the accommodations as outlined in the faculty notification letter. And then the other big role that we're asking instructors to play is to upload, deliver, or email the exams to Student Accessibility Services. And then obviously ensure that the testing agreement is filled out. And then where you folks as GATAs will play a role is that oftentimes we will see you folks in our office picking up exams or dropping them off. So we appreciate you immensely. The student's responsibility, so their responsibility is to do their intake, to register and re-register each semester in order to be accommodated. There is their responsibility to schedule their exams, and then problem solve with their instructor if there are challenges with the accommodations, and then speak with the instructor about different or alternative deadlines for assignments. So some common questions that we get in our office is, a student has disclosed that they have a disability to me. What do I do with this information? Does anyone want to participate? I cannot see the chat. So if folks want to participate, awesome. If not, I will just go through and give out the answers so we have time for questions. So if they are not registered with Student Accessibility Services, start by directing them to us. If they are already registered, sit with them and have a conversation about how you can best support their accommodation needs. Am I required to accommodate a student's request? As the TA/GA, the short answer is no. It is the instructor's responsibility. However, when it comes to lab assignments, extensions, or extensions in general, and you are asked, we ask that you reach out to the instructor to see what they think is fair and then go from there. What is a faculty notification letter? So we have changed systems and we're now using a different software than we were in the past. And so the accommodation letter has now changed to a faculty notification letter, and this is the letter that a faculty member is sent that outlines the student's accommodation. In some cases, they may share this information with you. It is important that you keep it confidential and work towards supporting all student needs and accommodations. Why don't all students provide the faculty notification letter at the beginning of the term? So like I said earlier, there are some instances where students will have temporary disabilities. There's all sorts of different reasons why this doesn't happen, but we do encourage our students with permanent disabilities to register at the start of the semester so that you folks can get those letters right off the bat. But for some reason, some students don't get diagnosed at the start of the year and some have temporary disabilities. So a little plug for UN Pride. I am the co-chair of UN Pride on campus, and so we exist to support the education of students, faculty, staff on all things 2S LGBTQIA+. We are currently working on our website, which will be uwindsor.ca/LGBT, and we do have an email address for anyone who has questions, needs resources, or has a student that is having a tough time. So I encourage you to also remember this resource if someone comes to talk to you and they need some support. And that is all for me. I tried to speed it up a little bit so that we had time for questions. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you all for wonderful contributions during the session. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat, or if you'd like, you can also unmute yourself and share your question out loud, whatever's easier for you. So please feel free to share your questions.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I was wondering, I think I missed Jocelyn's resources. Would I be able to get them in the chat?
Absolutely. And I also, I think, maybe successfully uploaded the slides to this Blackboard presentation as well, but I will put them in the chat for you. That's not a problem.
Okay,
And
thank you so much.
just so everyone knows as well, I will be following up with an email that will include the email addresses of all of our presenters for today, as well as links that were shared and PowerPoint slides and so forth. So keep an eye out for that. For anybody who does have to get going for any reason, I do want to share a feedback form in the chat here. We highly encourage feedback, so please take a moment there to share some feedback with today's presenters.
I have a question as well, if I can ask.
Sure.
In regards to the group, the student group who spoke a little earlier, I believe it was called ADHD and neurodivergence, and neurodiversity. That group, we said that it's intended for students who who've been diagnosed with ADHD and other neurodiverse students. I'm wondering, is it also like a good fit for students who are pre-diagnosis but are not necessarily self-diagnosed, but on their way to diagnosis, as it can be a long journey, but fairly certain that they are neuro distinct in some way?
It's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that one. So thank you so much for your question. So the ADHD project is right now mostly focusing on raising awareness and sharing resources and providing students and staff and faculty with information about ADHD and neurodiversity. So although we aren't a specific student group right now, we do have a board of advisors that are all students with lived experience, who participate in all of our workshops and sessions and such and help us to create content. And we're always looking for more people to connect with and more people to chat with. So if you're interested in getting more information about the project, regardless of your diagnosis status or how you identify, we'd be super happy for you to send us an email. You can email us at adhdeproject@uwindsor.ca. I think our email is also available in the slides that were shared, and you can also go to our website and there's a link to our email address there as well. Perfect. Thank you, Rami, for popping that in there. So yeah, and anyone is welcome to reach out, and we'd be very happy to chat with you and see what we can make happen.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to share? I will also say that with the follow-up email, all of today's presenters will be copied on that email. So if you don't have a question right now, or you'd like to direct a question outside of the session directly to one of the facilitators today, you're welcome to do that via email. And if you have any questions for myself as a facilitator, general facilitator of the network and today's session, please feel free to reach out to me as well. And just a reminder, as we're wrapping up here, I'm going to share the feedback form again. Please take a moment there just to fill out some feedback for today's presenters. And thank you again to all of our presenters today. It's been wonderful. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Liz. That was
Thank
fun.
you. That was.
Take care, you guys. Hope to see you again.